While Reform have spent the weekend celebrating, the Labour Party have been trying to get their heads around a new political reality. This was Keir Starmer's take on his party's washout at the local elections.
But the message I take out of these elections is that we need to go further and we need to go faster on the change that people want to see, and that's what I'm determined to do.
Now, that message, more of the same but faster, has not gone down well with some Labour backbenchers.
I mean, the idea that the public have given us such a kicking because they think we're not going fast enough and they want more of the same is just nonsense. It's arrant nonsense. I mean, the public are ahead of the government here. The public are calling out for more equality in distribution of wealth.
Protecting people, helping people to move forward in their lives and ensuring we've got those public services ready and working so that people can have that support when they need it. That is what Labour governments do. And I believe that when Labour does not meet that sweet spot, that expectation that people have of a Labour government, then they start to look in less favourable places.
Things like the winter fuel payment cut, things like the proposed cut to disability benefit, those aren't Labour approaches and they need to change. We look at the election in Runcorn, we had a 15,000 majority there. It was swept away, and it's not good enough to say, we only lost by 6 votes. That's a seat we should never lose, whatever the circumstances of the by-election.
In the Times, former Transport Secretary Louise Haigh had this proposal for the Prime Minister. So she said, the government's response on Friday was alarming. It failed to acknowledge any need to change course, but simply committed itself to double down on the plan whilst hemorrhaging votes to the parties of our left and right. It is now urgent that we develop a vision and a strategy that is confident in our values, sets the terms of the debate and takes the fight to reform rather than letting the fight come to us. That is the only way to hold our perilous coalition together. I believe the only way to achieve that is through an economic reset, through ripping up our self-imposed tax rules and by a serious programme of investment and reindustrialisation, because Nigel Farage is not wooing these voters with a traditionally right-wing offer. He is calling for the nationalisation of steel and water. Polling I saw revealed that banning fire and rehire was almost as popular among Reform voters as Labour ones. Laura Kuenssberg asked Health Secretary Wes Streeting about Starmer's message on the BBC.
There are changes you've made that you didn't warn people about, that people don't like. And telling people again and again you're going to go farther and faster with things that they don't want, is that really going to cut it?
Well, it's the outcomes people want to see. They want to see safer streets. They want to see stronger, more secure borders. They want to see waiting lists falling. They want to see the cost of living improving. Those things do take time. And you don't turn around a country with the range, the breadth, the depth of crises we inherited. You don't turn that around in just 9 months. So all I'd say to people, we've got the message. We're not daft. We haven't got our heads in the sand. All I'd ask people for is to give us a bit of time and to give us the benefit of the doubt.
We haven't got our heads in the sand, but give us the benefit. You can't go into government, sort of say, we're going to bring about this big change and then sort of be a bit crap for 6 months and then get hammered in an election and say, go on, give us a break. Give us a break. I think you might need something a bit more concrete than that. There's also been briefing from Downing Street that a couple of ministers might be up for the chop in response to last week's disaster. Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson has been tipped for demotion in a post-local election reshuffle, apparently over school reforms that blindsided the Prime Minister. That article also describes Culture Secretary Lisa Nandy as, quote, a certainty for the sack. I don't know what she's done wrong. This idea that sort of I actually find Bridget Phillipson very sort of almost disturbingly robotic. But Lisa Nandy, like politics aside, is anyone's bad impression of Labour because of Lisa Nandy? Who knows? Meanwhile, key advisors are trying to show they're not to blame for the catastrophe. This one really made me laugh. It's from the Financial Times. Chancellor Rachel Reeves cut the winter fuel allowance last July after the election to bolster the public finances, claiming the previous Conservative government had overspent. It was something the Treasury had been trying to get away with for ages, said a former senior government minister. Or senior government figure, sorry. They said Morgan McSweeney, then Starmer's head of political strategy, but now chief of staff, pretty much hung his head in his hands when he learned of the decision because he knew what it meant politically. While the local, to find this out now, right? This was months ago. He's Keir Starmer's key advisor, right? Keir Starmer has obviously signed off this decision, has stood by this decision for months when everyone was saying they should U-turn. Now they've finally lost in these elections. Suddenly Morgan McSweeney's got someone to message the Financial Times, tell them I never liked the policy anyway. Like, you're the most powerful person. inside that government. While the local election shock amongst the Labour ranks was still hitting home, other Labour ministers were out on the airwaves this weekend, proving not only that they're not listening, but that they're completely tone deaf. On Friday, Leader of the House of Commons, Lucy Powell, appeared on Radio 4's Any Questions with Conservative activist Tim Montgomery. He's actually a Reform UK activist now. This happened.
I don't know whether you saw the documentary on Channel 4 about rape gangs over
No,
this.
we want to blow that little trumpet now, do we? Yeah, okay.
There was a real issue.
Let's get that dog whistle out, shall we?
Okay, Lucy. Yeah.
There was a really big backlash to those comments, and a day later, Powell posted this apology. In the heat of a discussion on Any Questions, I would like to clarify that I regard issues of child exploitation and grooming with the utmost seriousness. I'm sorry if this was unclear. I was challenging the political point scoring around it, not the issue itself. As a constituency MP, I've dealt with horrendous cases. This government is acting to get the truth and deliver justice. Number 10 has said that Lucy Powell has its backing, though there is speculation, they're not happy with her. I suppose they forced her to make that apology. Ash, what's your take on how Labour is reacting to its very poor election results?
Well, I mean, the first thing, which was the level of denial and head in sand kind of affect from senior Labour figures, not just Wes Streeting, but Ellie Reeves also did the media around Rachel Reeves and some of her comments to the press, which is that, well, we've got to take really tough decisions. I don't think that anyone's going to be particularly happy with that, apart from Nigel Farage and Reform. He's going to be absolutely rubbing his hands with glee. Because if you go back to the winter fuel allowance, I mean, we said this at the time, Michael, which is, firstly, the saving that it's making the government. And for those listening on the podcast, I did some pretty heavy air quotations. The saving that the Treasury is making there is about 1.5 billion a year. So it's really not very much. And if you want to look at ways to raise revenue, you can also clamp down on tax avoidance. You can empower HMRC. That's something that you could do instead. It's not very much money, but the political consequences of it are absolutely dire. Firstly, pensioners are highly motivated voters. It's part of the reason why younger people get so screwed over, by government after government. It's because we tend to be lower turnout voters who are also concentrated in urban constituencies, whereas there is a big spread of pensioners and they're also highly motivated to turn out. The second thing is that there is a sense of fairness, right? The thing about a pensioner is that if they've worked their whole lives, they've paid into the system their whole lives. So I think that it's something which goes to the heart of what people think is wrong with this country, whether you are anti-immigration and pro-reform or whether you're like me and, you blame the parasitic landlord class, all the way up to BlackRock for making things worse. What unites both sides is this sense that people who actually work hard don't get anywhere. People who contribute to the system, who do forms of productive labor, who participate in socially useful activity, they don't get a payout. And so when you're attacking a pensioner, when you're scrapping something like winter fuel allowance, that goes right to the heart of that sense of unfairness. And it was a real tone deafness, an absolute tone deafness from Labour. And it was such an unforced error. I'm not surprised that Morgan McSweeney seems to be scrabbling around to repair his, sort of Svengali-like image of competence and intelligence, because it was so manifestly stupid. But the second point that I want to make is to talk about the grooming gangs. Now, I think that Lucy Powell's interjection, she says that she was motivated by, seeing a really serious issue reduced to a political talking point. But the manner in which she responded, it was also a bit of point scoring and pinball. But there is something which really bothers me about the way in which the grooming scandal is looked at. It's only ever looked at in terms of ethnicity and culture, and it's never looked at through the lens of what do grooming gang perpetrators from South Asian or Muslim backgrounds, what do they have in common with white perpetrators of group-based child sexual exploitation? Because when you say, well, the only way we can look at it is through the lens of culture and through race, you're saying that culture and race is an explanatory factor. And what that does is that rather than saying, well, actually, these sexual abusers, they've got something in common with the broader South Asian or Muslim community. And I actually think that means that obviously that tars everybody with the same brush in a way which is horrific. But two, and this is the most important point, I actually think that it puts victims of abuse or potential victims of abuse in even more danger, because you're not connecting the dots about what the risk factors and the indicators are for group-based child exploitation. One is, of course, impunity, a sense that I'm not going to get caught. That's obviously something that was felt by group-based sexual offenders in Rotherham and in Rochdale. The J report puts that down to the authorities feeling scared of being perceived as racist. I've always been a little bit skeptical of that explanation, but of course that can play a part. But that also plays a part when you've got white British offenders as well. That they're not scared of getting caught. They're not scared of being punished. Second thing, which I think bolsters that sense of impunity, is where you've got spaces where there aren't very many adult women around. Because when you've got a strong division between the genders, a strong division between the sexes, and you don't have adult women who are around and can, to put it very bluntly, monitor and call out the behavior of men. I mean, this is something that you saw within the Catholic Church. This is something that you've seen at elite boarding schools. And these are all factors which, again, mean that you've got abusers who feel like they're invincible and that they can target children. And then I think that there is something which is incredibly important here, which is the way in which authorities, and this goes from the police to, some people in social services. I don't think that this is all people in social services, but some who look at vulnerable children, especially vulnerable children who are care experienced, vulnerable children who come from working class backgrounds, and they view them as being consensual partners in what is child sexual exploitation. They say, oh, well, they're promiscuous. Oh, well, she thinks that he's her boyfriend. And because, unsurprisingly, children who are traumatized can also be disruptive, can also be difficult, they're treated like criminals. So they're treated, rather than being victims of, child sexual exploitation, these victims of abuse are instead treated like promiscuous criminals. And again, this is something which transcends race. This is how white working class victims have been looked at by the police. It's also something, and you see this in London, that working class children of colour are met with as well. And so this is my problem with looking at it solely through the lens of race, ethnicity, and religion, which is all these factors which are commonalities between group-based child sexual exploitation get missed. And I think what that risks doing is that it leaves victims unprotected rather than better protected.
The key thing is always, was there an element of it not being dealt with sooner because of racial sensitivity, right? And obviously that shouldn't happen. If there's a problem, you deal with it, right? Whatever the sort of fallout could be afterwards. But yeah, you've said you were never quite sure how much of a role that played anyway in this.
Yeah, I'm not sure. And the reason why is this, is that when you look at the disparities when it comes to policing, being perceived as racist doesn't seem to stop police from conducting stop and search on very flimsy backgrounds. Doesn't seem to, stop police when it comes to, treating certain kinds of people more roughly, manhandling people more, the use of things like spit hoods, the use of force. So what you would have to be saying to me is that when it came to group-based child exploitation, that there was this unique carve-out where police were being scared of being perceived as racist in this way, but they don't really mind there being disparities in their policing activity in all these other ways. That's something which doesn't quite make sense to me. What makes more sense to me is that you've got a combination of factors. One is that you've got the way in which working class girls were being seen as promiscuous, being seen as troublemakers, basically being looked at as though, oh, well, she's a slag, right? So they were being adultified, right? That's something where children are being treated by other adults as if they are themselves adults. I find that perhaps more convincing because, again, it's a commonality that you see across the country, across ethnicities. And then the second thing is potentially police corruption. There are, of course, cases of police corruption. I believe there was one in one of the big grooming cases where police officers were found to have been illegally purchasing anabolic steroids from one of the perpetrators. It would make sense to me if there was a combination of those factors. Again, I'm not ruling it out. I'm not saying that there weren't individuals responsible for safeguarding, whether that's police or others who are scared of appearing racist. That may be true. But I kind of feel that these first two things may have been the overwhelming factors.